Okay, good.
Okay, welcome everybody to our virtual outing for the month of June. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Kern Nuttal as our speaker tonight. Before we start, let me just tell you that the mission statement for the Grand Canyon Historical Society, we celebrate and promote the study and preservation of Grand Canyon's regional and cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of our members and the public. And this year we are celebrating 40 years as an organization. We started in 1984 as the Grand Canyon Pioneers Society. If you enjoy what you're seeing here tonight, we encourage you non-members to become a member. It's only $35 a year, and you can go to grandcanyonhistory.org. Your membership includes 4 issues of the Old Pioneer quarterly throughout the year, dealing with history topics throughout northern Arizona and the region of the Colorado Plateau. We do these virtual outings, and we also have real outings out into the landscape of the Grand Canyon region. And we also do oral histories. You can see here in the lower left, my father, Don Ranney, being interviewed by one of our oral historians, Tom Sulpizio. And if any of you listening tonight have a great idea for somebody who might be a worthy candidate for an oral history, please let us know. I'll draw your attention to the photograph up there in the upper left where you see a United plane and a TWA constellation, not the 2 exact planes that were involved in the crash at Grand Canyon, but 2 of the same planes. If you have an idea for a presentation you would like to hear, just contact us at outings@grandcanyonhistory.org. grandcanyonhistory.org is our main address. I want to bring your attention to our next real outing, which is going to be this Sunday, June 16th. And Dr. Emily Dale will lead a field trip to Apex, which is a vanished lumbering town. And we still have some open slots for this outing this Sunday. And Emily Dale has graciously agreed to do this for us again. And she has mentioned to me that on this particular trip, she's going to bring us to some of the sites that she has not brought visitors before. So even if you have done this trip before, you might think about coming along again. And this is Saginaw and Manistee Lumber Company town that was established in 1928. Our next month virtual outing will be on Tuesday, July 9th. And we're happy to have Ted Barone, Dr. Ted Barone, talking about Grand Canyon, then and now, a virtual photo exhibit. And he has been a volunteer with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, has been leading tours for several years to Alcatraz and more recently to Muir Woods. And he gave this presentation as only a 20-minute presentation at our last symposium, but he will have a full amount of time next month, July 9th. So right after the July 4th holiday, be sure to join us on Tuesday, July 9th. Anyway, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Kern Nuttal. He's a GCHS member and an author. He's a long retired chemist and pathologist and the author of In a Better Place, Cemeteries and Gravesites of the Grand Canyon, which is a fantastic book that describes many of the historic people who are buried in Grand Canyon Cemetery. He and his wife Cindy moved to Page, Arizona, and they've become enamored with the surrounding landscape and hiking opportunities. And tonight he's going to talk to us about some of the things he's been exploring at Dominguez Pass. I've been fortunate enough to visit Dominguez Pass, and I can only hope that the next time I go there, I go with Kern out there. So it's my pleasure to turn this over. Tom, you're going to have to stop my share because my cursor disappears when I give a program here, and I just can't escape this. There we go. And Kern, I turn it over to you at this time. Thank you for lecturing
Okay,
to us tonight.
thank you for the introduction and all the lies. No, I mean, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Let's see. I'm going to start my slideshow here. Okay, it looks like we're underway. So I'm going to come back to this slide in a couple of minutes. Um, Dominguez Pass, of course, is not too far from Page, so that holds a big interest for me. Uh, this is the view from Dominguez Pass, looking into the Paria. It's an astonishing geology. It doesn't fit into one photo, so you have to take a photo and stitch several together. Um, but just to orient us a little bit, here's a map of the area. You can see a page in the upper right, and the Colorado River running from upper right down to lower left. And right here is Lee's Ferry. That's about 10 miles from Page. Of course, 40 miles if you're driving. And then Dominguez Pass is a little further north, right there. And you get to Dominguez Pass a couple of different ways. You can walk up the Paria from Lee's Ferry and climb out, or you can come in from the Page side, from the east side of the pass, over that very large sand trap that we sometimes call Ferry Swale. Um, Now here's Horseshoe Bend, if you care about things like Horseshoe Bend. I'm going to mention it in a few minutes, so that's where it is. These days, Horseshoe Bend is such a madhouse with all the visitors there. You see pictures of Horseshoe Bend, and people say, oh, yes, the Grand Canyon. But of course, we know better. So I'm going to start by talking about the Dominguez-Escalante expedition. It's a very complicated story, very worth exploring. I'm essentially going to give it very short shrift tonight, just talk about one tiny little section that I'm interested in. But basically, two Franciscan friars left Santa Fe, New Spain in 1776, looking for a new path to California, to the Spanish missions in California. And they went quite far north in Utah, all the way up to the Provo area. And then when they started going a little further west, they decided they had run out of time, wouldn't make it through the winter, and so they turned around for home to come back to Santa Fe. And on that return trip, they ended up in a place they called San Benito de Salsipuedes, what we call Lee's Ferry. They weren't very happy about that location. As you can tell from the name, the name San Benito really refers to the robe of contrition the friars sometimes wore as punishment, and then Salsipuedes, meaning literally get out if you can. So they were quite trapped there. They were hemmed in by cliffs, and they couldn't get across the river. The water was too deep. A couple of people who tried to swim the river almost drowned. They tried to build a raft, but it kept getting swept back into the same side, and they didn't get any. Eventually, they sent out a couple of scouts to look up the what they call the drainage of the Santa Teresa, what we call the Paria, and they managed to find a spot to climb out. And so the entire party ended up going that way. And here's just a pictorial representation of the Dominguez Escalante expedition, just a little inset, a little portion of the Utah Historic Trails map, a very nice map. Um, but the Escalante expedition is shown there in green. Uh, that that black line, that heavy black line, is the Arizona-Utah border. Utah has a tendency to like to put this section of Arizona in their maps because they think that Arizona Strip belongs to them. That's the part west and north of the Grand Canyon, but we're going to keep it. Um, at any rate, uh, the expedition came along and ended up in this spot. They had were in the Fredonia area, came along what we call now the Winter Road, pretty much along what we know now as the Winter Road, that backcountry approach that ends up in House Rock Valley, right at that location. And they knew that they were going to have to cross the river. They were looking for a very wide, shallow spot. Uh, they had so they knew what they were looking for. They had that much intelligence from various Native Americans, but they didn't have enough because when they got to House Rock Valley, they turned south. This is actually where they were trying to end up at what was called the Ute Crossing or the Navajo Crossing, if that's your affiliation. Um, but when they got to House Rock Valley, they turned south. If they had turned north at this point, they would have really cut a few days off their trip. But they turned south, went down House Rock Valley, around the Paria Plateau, along the Vermilion Cliffs, and ended up at Lee's Ferry. So here's the way Escalante described climbing out Dominguez Pass. Of course, he's the one who kept the journal. It took us more than 3 hours to climb it because it has a very sloping sand dune for a start, and afterwards extremely difficult stretches and most dangerous ledges, and is at the very last impassable. And I want you to remember that at the very last impassable, because we're going to come back to that a couple times. And as a matter of fact, here we are. This is the impassable section, dead on the Dominguez Trail to Dominguez Pass. You can imagine bringing stock uh, over this point on the trail. Very, very difficult. People apparently did it. Not that hard for climbers, a little bit of a scramble. But of course, we call it the Dominguez Trail and Dominguez Pass, but we know that it was used for centuries before that by Native Americans just from the petroglyphs along the trail. This is one of the nicer petroglyphs. Here's an interesting figure. I've been told I can't call this a horse. I'll let you decide what kind of quadruped you think it is. And this is one of those nice glyphs that the more you look at it, the more detail you see. The only other thing I'm going to point out right now, however, is this heavily patinaed sunburst right over here. Nice spot. Now, this is how I learned about Dominguez Pass from Michael Kelsey, his guidebook, his original guidebook. Since he published this original one, he's made quite a cottage industry out of guidebooks. He must have 6 or 7 different versions now. Um, some people are very fond of his guidebooks, and other people are a little less warm about them. They're sometimes a little difficult to understand. My my wife has always threatened to write a version of this book called Michael Kelsey translated into English with readable maps. But if you've looked at his book, you might understand that sentiment. Um, my impression is sometimes I do have trouble following his directions. Once I end up in a specific location, it almost starts making sense. So I'll let you make of that what you will. But at any rate, We learned about Dominguez Pass from this book and climbed it in 2006. So, following his directions, we started at Lee's Ferry, walking up the Paria, and we're looking for a break in the cliffs, that low set of cliffs over on the left. Uh, is kind of an impediment to any place to climb out. So we're going to look for a break in that. But if you stop before you get all the way to the climb out spot and turn around and look, you can see a good deal of the trail. The trail goes across that sand dune there and then climbs up to the top, and that very tippy top part there, that's that impassable location. So here's the break in the cliffs, and there's a signpost right there on the right. That big boulder is very much a signpost. If we take a closer look at it, it has some interesting glyphs on it. Just ignore those tourists there, and let's zoom in and look at those nice two very interesting shaman figures in what I'm told is Glen Canyon linear style, and then some other graffiti. That figure in the upper right, that's probably a, a brand, a cowboy glyph. And this is historic graffiti. FTJ is Frank Johnson, one of the sons of Warren Johnson. Of course, Warren Johnson being a very important figure at Lee's Ferry. He was the ferryman from 1870 to 1890, an important figure. And he had a whole bunch of kids, Frank being one of them. So let's take a close look at the topo map here. The Dominguez Trail is actually shown on this topo, but it doesn't stand out very well. So I'm going to highlight it here. But you can see Paria Canyon over there on the left, and we're going to climb out right here. There's the initial climb out spot, and then a very long slog up the sand dunes, and then a final push to the top. And right here is that impassable spot, and followed by a short traverse over to Dominguez Pass proper. Now, one other thing I want to point out on this map: look down on the lower right, and there's a spot that's called Death Pockets, and I'm going to bring that up in a few minutes. I just want you to keep in mind the approximate location of that. But here we are at Dominguez Pass, looking east this time. A lot of identifiable features here. We've got Navajo Mountain on the skyline there. There's the city of Page. I don't know if I should call it a city, but you can see a lot of, you can see Tower Butte out there. You can see Boundary Butte. Over on the left skyline is the Caparowitz. A lot of identifiable features. So this is that encyclopedic book of Lee's Ferry history by P.T. Riley, a wonderful reference book. We're gonna take a look at what Riley has to say about the Dominguez-Escalante Expedition. I am very fond of this book, although I don't recommend sitting down and reading it cover to cover. It's quite dense. But in terms of if you're looking for specific information on Lee's Ferry history, it's a wonderful reference. But this is what Riley has to say. He says the Dominguez-Escalante expedition very probably was the first mounted party to traverse the ancient foot trail. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. Now, Riley knows so much more about this than I do, but I can't help but wonder if as soon as Native Americans had access to horses, I suspect they were traversing all sorts of ancient foot trails, but just a suspicion. And then another comment of Riley's: pioneers were to call this the Sand Trail for obvious reasons. Of course, there are many, many very sandy locations in this part of the country. And then one other thing I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is a supply party that tried to come down the backside of uh, from Dominguez Pass. And quite honestly, Dominguez Pass is a little hard to find from the backside, from the east. It's much easier to locate from the Paria side, but I'll come to that in a few minutes. So this is Nora Condell's impression of climbing out Dominguez Pass. She climbed the pass in 1936. She was a British artist, loved coming to the area and staying with Buck Laurie, the Laurie family. Um, but she went out on this astonishing trip with Ed Fisher as the guide. Ed Fisher was a well-known local guide, actually lived in the Paria drainage a little further upstream from the turn to Dominguez. He lived at the Wilson Ranch. You won't find much there anymore, but it's the location of a nice spring. Uh, then Nora also went out with David Laurie, the son of Buck Laurie, the builder and owner of the lodge at Marble Canyon. And she talks about this adventure in her book, Unsentimental Journey. It's quite interesting. They went out for 16 days on this astonishing trip, went all the way to Rock Creek Canyon. Uh, and she talks about how terrified she was climbing Dominguez Pass initially. And then when she came back some 16 days later, she said it was so easy that she could have put on lipstick. And just another one of her impressions from the pass area. You can actually see these sketches in the P.T. Riley collection at Klein Library if you're inclined to go and dig them out. And here's her impression of her accommodations at Buck Laurie's lodge. Uh, like I say, she got along very well with the Lauries, would often come and stay for a month or two. But the accommodations might have been a little primitive. Um, incidentally, Buck Laurie called his place the Vermilion Cliffs Lodge. He didn't call it Marble Canyon. It wasn't until Hubble came along. He didn't like the name Vermilion Cliffs, and he took down Buck Laurie's sign, threw it away. Someone came along and said, "Hey, what are you doing with this sign? Can I have it?" And they said, "Sure, take it." And they took it about 2 miles up the road and started their own place. So another one of Nora's drawings, just of Cathedral Rock. The last thing I'm going to mention about Nora is her plaque. This is where her ashes were scattered in 1948, and it's always I've always found the site very touching, as returned to rest in the place she loved, and it reminds me of how much I love it too. But here's the location. It's very easy to find. I'm sure some of you already know the location. But if you're crossing Navajo Bridge and you take the first right as you come off the bridge towards Lee's Ferry, you only have to go a short distance down the road, probably 50 yards or so. You look over at the left, and here's a 5 Mile Point on the skyline. And you look at all those big Chinook boulders that have rolled off the cliff line, and you can see her plaque right here. You can actually see this from the road, but pull over and go out and take a look for it. Now, here's someone else who climbed the pass in 1935. This is Minor Tillotson. Some of you may recognize the name. Uh, he came to the Grand Canyon as the park engineer in 1922. Of course, that was pretty early. It only became a park in 1919, but he stayed for a long time and even became superintendent and was superintendent for more than 10 years. Imagine a superintendent lasting that long now. But even after he left and became Southwest Regional Director in Santa Fe, he had a lot of influence on the area. Now, this is a shot from his family album. Clearly, Horseshoe Bend from the river. I don't know very much about this photo. I'm not certain it was taken. I've assumed in 1935. And I don't know the circumstances under which it's taken. The last time I showed this photo, I said it was the first known photo of Horseshoe Bend, but then someone in the audience came along and showed me this, or showed my wife this. This is Jerry Nealand from Page was familiar with this photo from the Stanton expedition. So I suspect that someone tried to recreate a couple of those photos from the Stanton expedition, but I'd like to know more about that story. At any rate, this is the photo that really set me off on Tillotson. Tillotson in the Paria region. I looked at this years ago and I said, what are you doing in my neck of the woods? Why aren't you paying attention to your job at the Grand Canyon? And it really piqued my interest to learn what he was doing in the Paria region. And then an accompanying photo that I found just astonishing. It was just labeled Trail from Paria Creek. And the first time I looked at this, I thought, my God, how many places can you climb out of the Paria? Not that many. But I've already given this away. It's Dominguez Pass. It took us a while to figure that out. But when I first looked at this, I thought, gee, could this be Bushhead or even the Adams Trail? But at any rate, we later learned it was Bushhead, or excuse me, the Dominguez Trail. And if we zoom in here, let's back up for a second. Look at Tillotson in his ranger hat and his leather chaps, and zoom in and look at that ranger hat and leather chaps and his arrogant pose. Definitely Tillotson. Now look to the right. There's another guy standing there that we learned later. That was George Fisher. Actually, he was acting as the guide for the Tillotson party. He's the younger brother of Ed Fisher. Of course, Ed Fisher was the guide for Nora, and now George Fisher is acting as the guide for Tillotson. And here is just, we finally managed to identify the location of the photo, and just to show one matching spot on the photos. You can see a number of matching details. But let's take a closer look at the Dominguez Pass area again on the topo map. I've highlighted the Dominguez Trail just to make it really stand out. But I want to tell you that this photo wasn't taken anywhere on what's marked here as the Dominguez Trail. It was actually taken on this little bypass route. Now, as you're approaching the top, there's a subtle place that you turn to the right, and it's a much easier route for stock animals than charging straight up. Dominguez and Escalante came along. They had no guide. They just charged straight up the slope and came out at that impassable location, which I'd like to convince you was indeed impassable. And in fact, the USGS surveyors who marked the route on this map, likewise, just came up to this location and kept charging straight on up. and marked that as the official trail. And indeed, when I came along the first time I did it in 2006, that's exactly the way I went, straight up. But after going out there a few times and discovering the alternative path, uh, it's now when you're looking for it, pretty easy to spot. But someone who's unfamiliar with the area, like Nora would be, or Tillotson, you got to have a guide to point out that bypass route. Now, it seems to me that Native Americans almost certainly knew about the bypass route. Now, we don't know that. There aren't any glyphs along that bypass route. All the glyphs, as a matter of fact, on the Dominguez Trail are lower down on the west side. And once you start approaching the top and all the way to the east, there aren't any glyphs. Um, and I think that's one of the factors that contributes to approaching from the east is a little more difficult. It really doesn't have all that many identifying features, and certainly no glyphs. Um, this is just a photo taken along that bypass route, a little stone corral. So we know Tillotson was here in 1935, but we didn't know what he was doing there. And uh, we went to the Grand Canyon Museum collection, and they're very nice archives where there's just a ton of information on Tillotson, but nothing about his trip to this location. Um, and we looked a few other places. My wife actually wrote to the National Archives. There are some Tillotson files there, but that didn't go anywhere. And the Utah State Archives didn't have anything, and we finally just kind of put the project aside. Didn't know what Tillotson was doing there. But something else that was going on in the Park Service in 1935 was this. They were putting together this plan for this very ambitious Escalante National Monument, just this huge area of the Colorado River in Utah. I wanted to make a national park out of it. Um, of course, we know that that plan failed, but we also know, by the way, we know the field reconnaissance on that project was done by Minor Tillotson and his colleague, Roger Toll, who was the superintendent at Yellowstone. Uh, but we do know that this area in the square here, that eventually became Canyonlands in 1962. And my wife, looking for some information on Tillotson, sat down with the Canyonlands administrative history and read through it to the point of reading the references. And we know how obsessed people are when they read the references. But she ran across this reference, which was a real revelation. And I'm just going to read the highlighted portion here. According to several sources, the complete report from Tillotson on the Escalante National Monument has been missing since the 1970s, with fragments of the document found in various memos and so on. But this was the really interesting part. This stands for Glen Canyon National Recreation Area Archives. Uh, who would think to look there? I mean, Glen Canyon didn't come along until 1972. You're going to look there for something that happened in 1935. Well, that's actually what it turned out to be the case. Um, and the irony of spending all this time looking in various locations only to find it under our noses. My wife actually volunteers in the archives and just went and pulled this file, and out tumbled a very nice story. And it starts with this guy, Arno Kammerer, who was the Park Service director in 1935. and he was looking at a map like this, maybe this very one. Um, and this kind of puts the proposed Escalante National Monument into perspective with everything else around it. But he looked at this, and then he looked at this section down here in the blue triangle, and he said, "Now wait a second. You've got that huge long area of the Colorado River in Utah. Now look at all this section of the Colorado River in Arizona. It almost goes down to the Grand Canyon." Well, back when the Grand Canyon was a lot smaller. And he said Tillotson and Toll, he said, "You guys, you go take a look at that." One other thing I want to mention about this map, I find it amusing that on this map they call Navajo Bridge Lee's Ferry Bridge. Of course, we know the first name for Navajo Bridge was Grand Canyon Bridge. It wasn't a very good name because the bridge didn't go across the Grand Canyon, went across Marble Canyon. So someone decided to change it, and they changed it to Lee's Ferry Bridge for the nearby proximity of Lee's Ferry, which essentially the bridge was replacing. But man, people in Utah didn't like that. John D. Lee was not very popular in Utah. He was still blamed for the Mountain Meadows Massacre and excommunicated from the church and so on and so forth. And so they pretty much insisted that name be changed. And it was finally changed to Navajo Bridge, which is a better name anyway. So here's the trip itinerary that came out of that file. Very detailed, 3 or 4 page document, just to show you how detailed. I'm going to just read the beginning to you. Tillotson and Toll started Friday, December 6th, 1935 at 2 p.m. from the South Rim, and they drove and arrived at Lee's Ferry at Leo Weaver's place uh, about 4 hours later. Um, Leo Weaver called his place Paradise Canyon, but we call that now Lonely Dell, and we still call it the Weaver Ranch House, of course. But that's where they stayed that night. And then in the morning, George Fisher came along with 3 saddle horses and 3 pack horses or mules, maybe, and all the camping gear. And they set out up the Paria. And here they are climbing out the Dominguez Trail, kind of a rough section here. Roger Toll did all the photography, so there aren't any photos of him. Um, and they climbed to Dominguez Pass and what they called East Paria Bench, what we call Ferry Swale. And then this is where they stayed that night in this alcove. This is out by Death Pockets. The weather was a little inclement, kind of an intermittent rain, and it was nice to get some shelter. If you go out to Death Pockets, it's not too hard to find that same alcove. And here's a shot from inside. I just can't imagine that they took all their stock animals into that alcove. It must have been a real crowd, but it gives you a nice feeling for all the great slick rock in that area. So here's another map from that file from the archives, the Glen Canyon archives. Uh, they also took an auto trip up to the Paria Plateau. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this section over here on the upper right. So let's zoom in on that. And here's Lee's Ferry on the map. Here's the climb out to Dominguez Pass. Here's that alcove where they camped that first night. And then the second night, they went up to a location known as Thousand Pockets. Now, that's a very popular hiking destination in the Page area. But they ended up camping out on the rim that night, and then they came back the next day. So here's a shot from Thousand Pockets, one of the more photogenic water holes in the area. Uh, there are some very deep water pockets that last a good length of time out of Thousand Pockets. I think the reason Death Pockets has that name is because there the pockets are very shallow. And when it does rain, if you depend on the water out there, you're likely to die. Just a personal theory. Um, so when Tillotson and Toll got back to the South Rim, they sent the director, Kammerer, this telegram. And just to read one line from it, project already includes exceptionally large area and believe undesirable to increase further or to extend into Arizona. And so after some discussion, everyone basically agreed that the proposed Escalante National Monument would stay entirely in Utah and no part of it would be in Arizona. Um, Now, this plan was presented to Utah in a series of public meetings in 1936. It ran into very, very heavy opposition. Eventually, the Park Service, in a negotiation with a Utah delegation, agreed to a lot of compromises. First, cutting down the total area to that darker area that centers around the Colorado River. They agreed to allow grazing rights in perpetuity. They agreed to mining access, and they even agreed to river development. So there was nothing in this proposal that would have protected the river from damming. And it's probably just as well. The plan was killed in a congressional vote in 1940. Uh, Largely because of Utah's opposition, but also because by 1940, people were becoming very, very concerned about the war in Europe. Um, Now, one other aspect I want to talk about is coming into Dominguez Pass from the east side. This is a what I like to call the Paria Ridge on the skyline there. Um, and on the other side of that, of course, is the Paria drainage. Uh, this feature right here, this my wife and I like to call this the cake just because it's a nice, easily identifiable feature. It kind of has a layer on it, so we call it the cake and use it as an orienting feature. Um, but from Page, if you drive out across the bridge towards Utah on Highway 89, before you get to the border, right here, there's a turn to the left. And that goes all the way down to this location down here, to the trailhead to Thousand Pockets. And it's possible to continue on that road all the way down the Ferry swale drainage. And that's the way we used to go when we were going out to Dominguez Pass. But it's just a horrible way to go. It's terminally sandy. There are a couple of narrow spots that if you ever happen to run into someone coming out the other direction, you'd probably both be stuck there for hours. So what we do now is we get to this intersection, take a left, and end up right here, looking off the Slick Rock. It looks a little scary right there, but it's actually a much easier way to go. And the road goes due south from that location, right past this location called Willow Tank. Now, Willow Tank itself isn't a lot to look at, but it's a very interesting historic area. Some people believe that this is where Bucky O'Neill caught the Diablo train robbers in 1889. Some people say it was more up around Cannonville, but Willow Tank is also a contender. So you take that road south past Willow Tank. Uh, this is an early part of the road. And right here, there's that feature that we call the cake. And the road's pretty good past Willow Tank for about a mile, and then you hit the slick rock where the slope increases and the road deteriorates significantly. Uh, we usually just pull off at this location, park by the road, and walk. And from this location, we can get to Dominguez Pass in about an hour and 10 minutes. Um, you can drive this section if you're willing to beat up your vehicle. You'll probably take about 20 minutes off your hike. The road actually does get a little better above this again. But we, like I say, always hike. And so this is the area where P.T. Riley tells a little story about the Powell Party. So 1872, John Wesley Powell had come off the river and gone to Kanab. He had left his men at the ferry. They needed supplies, so he hired three Kanab residents to take supplies to Lee's Ferry. Of course, the guys at the ferry were planning to start the survey of southern Utah. But at any rate, the Kanab residents decided, oh, it'll be a lot faster. We'll go by the sand trail. Well, they became horribly lost coming in that way, and actually, a couple of them had to actually be rescued by the Powell people. And so, this is probably where the story comes from. That coming from the east side, from the Page side across Ferry Swale, very easy to get lost, and it is more difficult. Uh, this perspective here doesn't look so bad. Right here we have the cake. Here we have the canyon that you need to go up, and it's a little hard to appreciate in this photo. But if you notice that flat section in that canyon, that's actually a little piece of the Paria Plateau. And I always look for that because I know when I see that little bit of Paria Plateau through the canyon, I've got the right canyon. Now, if you come up the Spencer Trail, walk along the backside to get to Dominguez and go down the Dominguez Trail, which is the easy way to do it, uh, you cross a lot of these little canyons, and deciding which one you need to go down is a little difficult. Of course, these days we have electronic devices to help us, but at any rate, all you have to do is walk up the drainage. And that's what I did the first time I went up that little canyon. As a matter of fact, the first couple times, I finally realized there was a trail there. It's a little difficult to see and a little faint, but it's a little faster as well. And then as we're approaching Dominguez Pass proper, I always keep my eyes open for the bighorn. We often see a bighorn at Dominguez Pass, and just a close up of the bighorn there. And I'm going to conclude with that. I'm going to suggest to you that if you go to Lee's Ferry, please think about uh, um, Dominguez Pass and all the people that have been there. Perhaps go look for the Nora Condell plaque if you haven't already. There are a lot of things to do at Lee's Ferry than just start your river trip. Okay, I would entertain some questions if anyone is foolish enough to ask any.
Thank you very much, Kern. I think I can start off with a question concerning the two padres, Dominguez and Escalante. I understand they were at San Benito de Salsipuedes or Lee's Ferry for 11 days.
I
Did
think
they
that's correct.
still have Indian guides with them? Because it
No,
seems like if no, they had none.
no, no, no. They had somewhere around Fredonia. I think they lost their last guide, And so by the time they hit House Rock Valley, uh, they didn't know which way to turn. And like I say, if they had turned north at that location, they would have avoided Lee's Ferry and made their trip a lot easier.
So they literally just stumbled onto Dominguez Pass.
Yes, yes,
Maybe
that
they
is.
had knowledge that petroglyphs were a sign that you can go this way, but that might
Yeah,
explain the 11
yeah.
days.
I have never read that anyone actually saw the petroglyphs. It seems likely that they would have. I think it was actually the Menendez brothers who went uh, up the Paria and found that spot to climb out. But I don't know whether they actually identified the glyphs. To me, they're signposts.
Very good. We have a comment from Cindy Stafford who says that John Wesley Powell was hurrying to Salt Lake City to see his wife and baby daughter. So that was
Oh, that's
certainly
right.
some incentive
Yes,
to go
yes.
there.
Yes, that's an important point. He wasn't just playing hooky. He actually had, it's funny to me that people don't talk about the reason that he was so often absent from the river. But
Yeah.
so it
And
goes.
Beth
He
Cook
didn't talk.
writes, this information is all new to me. Thank you very much. And Rob Mason wants to send you a note, says, love your use of the maps. So helpful in understanding the big picture. Thanks for sharing all of this wonderful history. Enjoyed your investigation of Tillotson's trip, which I must
Uh,
say actually is a really big bonus to this lecture. He's a major figure in Grand Canyon's history.
yes, absolutely, a big figure, and really, people from the Grand Canyon went to Lee's Ferry routinely. Many of from those early pioneer days found themselves at Lee's Ferry. It's an integral part of Grand Canyon history.
And Kim
Okay, my
Christensen says,
propaganda. I'm sorry.
oh yeah. Kim Christensen writes, great presentation. Thank you. And somebody named Helen Ranny said, Wayne and I need to go exploring up there. And I think she means with you and Cindy. So that would be a great wintertime exploration report.
You'd be welcome. You'd be welcome to come. Let's do it the easy way from the backside first.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Anybody else have anything that they want to ask Kern at this time?
Okay, what a relief.
Okay, well, I just want to remind everybody who's listening that if you want to see a shorter version of this, you can go to the Grand Canyon Historical Society website. And from our 2023 symposium, we have all 39 presentations that were professionally recorded, and a shorter version of Kern's talk about Dominguez Pass can be found there, and you can share it with others. And I also just want to remind you about our outing this weekend, June 16th. Dr. Emily Dale will be leading people to the Apex town site, which was a lumbering town site that was established in 1928. Just write to outings@grandcanyonhistory.org, and we can get you reserved a space on that. That's all the questions we have current. So we really appreciate your time tonight. We look forward to your wife Cindy's presentation in August. Next month, we'll have Ted Barone doing his Then and Now presentation at Grand Canyon National Park. Thank you, everybody, for supporting the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And also next month is going to be our annual picnic at Shoshone Point, and we encourage everybody to come out and spend a day looking at the Grand Canyon and visiting with other Grand Canyon history enthusiasts. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Wayne. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, and thank you. Good night, everybody.